still be neighbors. I look forward to watching their project come to fruition. Kind regards, Andrea Hillier, 303 Forest Ave. And finally, dear Dan and Kelly, I'm pleased to hear that you are planning to build a new garage, pool house, and horse barn. Since you moved to 312, you have made many desirable upgrades to your home and property, and I am sure that this project will be done in the same good taste. Good luck. Agnes Furio, 321 Forest Ave. So that concludes the information that was presented as part of our application and the supplemental abutter correspondence.
Thank you, John. Robin, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. At this point, could everybody who is on this particular meeting please identify themselves and the relationship to the applicant? Please, we'll start with Kelly Bliss.
Hi, I'm Kelly, and this is Dan Bliss, and we are the applicant.
And can you also just state your address as well?
Oh, sorry.
Just for the record.
312 and 306 Forest Ave.
Thank you.
Okay, Jennifer Schultz.
I'm a land use and permitting attorney, and I represent one of the direct abutters to the Bliss property at 110 Black Rock Road. I work at Sullivan and Worcester as a partner, and I also live in Cohasset at 72 Nichols Road.
Okay, and I see we have the boys, B-O-Y-E, the boys, Hank and Max. Max is the baby, I take it?
Max was a baby. That's
We're in there somewhere.
That's my wife's profile picture. He looks a little different now. Hank Boy, my wife Tara is on too. She'll introduce herself in a second. 295 Forest Avenue. We live catty corner to the property, across the street.
I'm Tara Boy. Sorry, we share an iPad in my family. So Max is our son. Okay. 295 Forest.
Thank you. And Dave Dugan?
Yes, Dave Dugan, 100 Black Rock Road. We are direct abutters of the Blisses, and Mr. Cavanero read the letter of support that we submitted at the top of this call.
Okay, and David Lucier.
93 Black Rock Road. I across the street from 100 Black Rock Road.
Okay, and Mike Parchley.
Yep, 103 Black Rock Road, across the street from 110 Black Rock Road.
Okay, and Carmen Hudson, whom I know. Carmen? Hello, Carmen. Can you introduce yourself? Well, I know Carmen is with Cavanero Consulting Group. That much.
That's correct. She may just be listening in, Robin.
Okay, and Jordan Smith.
Yes, also permitting counsel working with Jennifer Schultz. I am not a Cohasset resident.
Okay, and I have a phone number here, 617-512-8839. Who would that be? Silence. Okay, thank you all. Do we have questions from the board? Michael?
Does Jennifer Schultz want to make a presentation?
Does she want to make a presentation first? Absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't know if the board was speaking or people were asking questions of the board. I apologize. Thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. I just need a couple minutes. And actually, John, would you mind if I stole your plan? I think maybe Pam had that up on the screen.
I'll put it back up.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate that.
And could you say, Jennifer, could you just speak up a little louder, please?
Yes, no problem. As we're pulling up the plan, I will begin. As I noted, I'm a permitting and land use attorney with Sullivan and Worcester in Boston, and a 9-year resident of Cohasset, formerly served on the zoning board. And I represent the Weissman family who live at 110 Black Rock Road. with their backyard and the back of their house is a direct abutter, not only to the Bliss property, but to the location of the paddock. And as you'll be able to see on the plan that Pam will pull up, the 100-foot dotted line just nips or misses perhaps the back of their property, but that does demonstrate the nearness and adjacency of what we're talking about for distances.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Jennifer. So you guys can't see my screen right now?
I see a sort of a document management part of your screen.
I'm sorry. Let me try that again.
We just have a list of documents.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. There we go. Thank you.
Okay.
So quickly, although John did note a campaign to alert abutters of this permit request and this hearing, unfortunately, and this has been made clear to Pam and also to the Blisses themselves, the Weissmans never received notice of this hearing. They did receive the initial abutter notice from earlier in February, which simply stated and described in general the application for a stable permit, but they never received any follow-up, which is required under the regulations within 14 days for notice of the hearing, describing in detail, which is required, the variances being sought and the explanation for why the variances are deserved. Obviously, he did find out about the hearing. He learned about it last Friday through, small town living. So while we're very happy that he was able to learn, I did want to point out, I suppose for the record, if nothing more, that we are not certain that the notice requirements were in fact entirely followed. And one more error is that your Board of Health regulations require an engineer stamped plan to be included in that abutter notice so that everyone can make determinations regarding setbacks, distances, and all of the details that you would have on a plan from Cavanaro. And that was not presented as any part of any package that was given to the Weissmans ahead of time. But more significantly, I think, is the substance of the concerns here. So as the most direct abutter with their dwelling and usable backyard area that is closest to the area where the horses will be for many hours of each day, they are concerned about the adjacency and the nearness of this. While it is a 1.8 acre property that the Blisses own, they have chosen to site the horse barn, run, and paddock area as far as possible from their dwelling and as near as possible to the Weissmans' dwelling. Very significantly is that the Bliss property is in between the Weissmans and the ocean, which means that the prevailing winds run downwind from the Bliss property to the Weissman property. And so, the bit of ledge that is there is certainly not a block of the odor or noise that will be carried by that prevailing wind. I'd be very interested in seeing an actual technical study done to prove that, especially because the zoning regulations, as I'm sure the board knows, require that farm animals and livestock cannot be kept in any residential area if there is any odor or noise observable at any lot line. The burden of that should not be put on the abutters. The burden of proving that is on the applicant for the application. Now, I know those are not the regulations for the Board of Health, but of course, if the Board of Health does approve this permit, their next step will be a building permit application to the building inspector with whom I have already talked. And the applicants have to prove it's no odor and no noise at any property line. That's the only set of circumstances wherein keeping livestock and farm animals is appropriate in a residential neighborhood. Cohasset, I live here and have lived here for quite some time. It's not a farm community. Yes, we have and love Holly Hill Farm. I sat on the board there for many years, but this is not Norwell with acres and acres, 5-10 acre properties where someone could easily keep horses entirely out of view, noise, and smell of their neighbors, and there would be no concern for disease vector and all of that. This is a under 2 acre property surrounded by properties, many of which are under half an acre. It still is a tight-knit residential, tightly settled residential community. I would be very interested in learning how many of these private stable licenses are held by private owners in Cohasset. My guess, just knowing the town, is very few. So moving on to the list of concerns, in addition to the adjacency nearness, the Weissmans being downwind, is the waste generation. We were sort of astounded and horrified to learn how much excrement a single horse releases each day. And while of course appreciate the effort at a waste management system with the stables being cleaned daily, with the property only being cleaned weekly and nothing being done about what I fear is gallons of urine into the dirt, also directly downwind, I again have a very hard time believing, but more significantly, in no way has it been proved with technical analysis that there will be no odor at the property line. And otherwise, given that this is the Board of Health, that this does not create a health hazard to other members of the public, both the Weissmans and the many pedestrians that use one of the only sidewalks in Cohasset that is heavily traveled, both by pedestrians alone and people with dogs who, if they're anything like my dog, will bark their face off at a horse. In addition to the waste generation management, we wonder and worry about the waste management monitoring. Is this going to be a burden that is on the town, that is overtaxed with other public health and other issues where monitoring a single private horse stable on someone's property should not be the highest public priority in the use of tax dollars? How will it be monitored? And again, how do we avoid making sure that the burden isn't put on the abutters because of the desire to keep horses on their property and not off-site at a stable? I do wonder if Holly Hill Farm has stables where they could keep the horses. I wonder if these horses are already owned where they have been kept beforehand, and why it would not be more appropriate from a public health standpoint to keep the horses off the property. Moving on, we worry about insects, rodents, and disease. Again, appreciate that there's a vector management program, but is that program appropriate for a residential neighborhood with these specific distances, with these specific neighbors, with the sidewalk there, and the downwind location of the Weissmans and others across the street from them? And then, as I initially noted, odor and noise. Odor and noise are obviously a concern for public health. They were addressed. They were attempted to be addressed in John's presentation. They certainly will not satisfy the zoning regulations of no noise and no odor at any property line, which is directly out of the zoning regulations. That is a quote verbatim. And the noise, I have to say, saying that, just stating without evidence or proof that the ambient noise of Forest Avenue will drown out the noise of the horses. No comment on the noises of any of the dogs walking by or what the dogs barking at the horses will do, but also simply saying that the neighs every now and again are a lovely part of living near horses. This is not a farm community, and not everyone thinks of it that way. So it's borderline offensive to have heard that. Overall, as I noted, and I am coming to the end, I promise, this is just an inappropriate location for a private horse stable, inappropriate and unnecessary. Directly on the lot itself, I'm really interested truly in hearing why the horses should be in this location from a public health standpoint and not closer to the Bliss's house. Why not in the other dog leg that is, does not have a house directly downwind from it of their property and over closer to the Weissmans? It seems like the entire presentation and all of the letters of support are not people who are impacted in the same way that the Weissmans are. As I noted, Cohasset is not a farm town. Why cannot the horses be kept off-site? And then finally, in terms of a potential solution, which obviously is the goal, as the Board of Health knows, it has discretion to require any other reasonable setback for a stable and the accompanying structures that is in their regulations. So it could require that the stable paddock run be located elsewhere on the site, or moreover, the board could determine that there is nowhere on their site that is appropriate from a public health standpoint. And again, as I noted, I'm not really sure the point of even proceeding forward, given that there is no way that this satisfies the zoning regulations. Thank you for giving me this time.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I do have a question, Jennifer. You did note in your letter, and I quote, "I doubt whether your property in such a tightly settled neighborhood can satisfy both the Board of Health regulations and zoning requirements." You're referring to zoning requirements. So to what does that refer?
Sure. So if you go to the table of uses in the zoning code, there is a use category for and I'm happy to do a cut from the PDF so that you can have this in writing and not just trust me. But in the table of uses, there's a use category for the keeping of livestock, farm animals, or poultry for personal use. So and then there's a separate category for commercial use. So this is for personal use. And you'll see that while it is allowed in all of the residential districts, it is only allowed on the condition that, and I'm not reading from it right now, I'm happy to do so. So I just want to state that this is from memory right now, on the condition that you receive the Board of Health approval and that there be no odor or noise observable at the property line. And I did speak with Director Hallen to make sure that my understanding of that was correct, that what it does is, although it is as of right, it's sort of as of right-ish, where in order to qualify for that as of right use, you have to receive both the Board of Health licensure and be able to prove to the building inspector that what you are seeking will create zero odor. It says no, not zero, no odor and no noise at the property line, which has to be interpreted as every property line.
Are you suggesting that this proposal as it sits will not meet zoning requirements, as you just noted?
Yes, I am.
And are you prepared to move that in the direction of the building inspector, get a reading on that before we go through calisthenics here?
So I have written separately to the building inspector, and what he told me, and then I spoke with him on the phone yesterday, is he noted that the Blisses have appropriately not yet applied to him for the building permit for all of these structures, and only when they do will he take it up. And already noting the objection of the direct abutters, will he then request information from the Blisses so that he can make the determination of whether zoning can be satisfied here. I'm happy to do anything I can to expedite it and sort of work within the bounds that the different town officials are willing to do, but that is what he told me yesterday.
Yeah, it would help the board to see in writing those particular comments from the building inspector.
I'd be happy to engage with Director Howe, and I'm sure you all can reach him as well.
Great. Michael, you were going to speak.
I'm just thinking about, I mean, so the zoning board will need to review the noise and smell. I mean, as a scientist, I'm curious to know how you prove that there is no something. That's a really difficult thing to prove, but I mean, it's written the way it is. I understand.
You can't prove
I was exactly right. It's really hard to prove a negative. But nonetheless, I was actually just kind of struck just by, you know, the number and extent of variances required in order to meet the public health standards that were written in the ordinance. And it does seem to me like this is a little bit shoehorned into a property where, you know, it's not quite gonna fit. So I guess first I have a question for Attorney Schultz, but and that would be, if the setbacks were not a variance being requested, would your client still object to that? Like, would this still be an issue for them? Right? In other words, they would not have, basically, let me reel this back. I'm mostly interested in whether we actually can even talk about this tonight, because, you know, with respect to the notification question that you raised at the very beginning, if it turns out that you know, if we were able to act on this tonight one way or another, are you saying that basically, is it your position that we should not be even considering this tonight and instead kicking it down the road? Or are you by your presence here saying, yeah, that mark was missed in our opinion, and yet we're interested in moving this forward? Where are you standing on that? Just so I understand whether this is, we're going to do the calisthenics for.
Understood. We're taking the position that we feel lucky that we learned about it in time. I just wanted to note that unfortunately, my client did not receive notice or sufficient information in the initial notification that he received. Nevertheless, because we learned about it in time and I worked over the weekend,
okay.
we're here, we are not wasting everyone's time from a procedural position.
Okay, great. That's an important point. The second is for the Bliss family that I just wanted to ask. In terms of options on your property, if this were, are there options size-wise that would move this elsewhere, that would allow you to move this elsewhere on the property, within, for example, within the variances, so within the borders, such we don't have to even talk about variances? Or is this something that, because you would like to bring 2 horses in, and because you have plans for the property and all these other things, that you're just not, there's no conceivable way that you could accommodate the setback requirements? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Mr.
Sure.
Yeah, because and actually, before we even get there, I'd like to address that. But there's so much information that we seem like we've switched from the applicant's proposal here to a discussion with the abutter's attorney, and I'd just like to go back a little bit and try to regroup. Actually,
no. My point is not about the abutter's concerns. When I read this requirement, I was reading the setbacks and I was saying, wow, that's a lot of setback variance that we're talking about. And so this is where I'm focusing my attention right now.
That's fine.
So my first question to Attorney Schultz is more about, like, are we going to even talk about this now and then have a problem later? So now I've moved on. So now I'm on a different topic, which is, are there options that don't require these kinds of setbacks?
Sure. So talking about the the size of the paddock itself. So the size of the paddock, it needs to be for all safe distances and for fair design for horse. It needs to be about this size, whether it's 80 by 120 or 60 by 120, 100 by 200. It's this range. It doesn't want to really lend itself to be much smaller than this. So if you take that box, which is that shape that we have, right now we satisfy all of the requirements with the exception of essentially the abutter across the street from Forest Ave. So we exceed the setback to the property line to the Weissman's house, for example. It's a 30-foot setback to the property line from the paddock,
John, it's
100 feet
from the
to the
dwelling,
house. We are 100 feet from the house. We are almost 60 feet to the property line. So we double what you're required to have for a setback. Similarly to the rear and obviously to the other side of the property, we're well beyond the setback. Forest Ave has a 50-foot layout. So in essence, our setback to that property line, which is really the nearest property is across the street, is well in excess of the 30-foot setback from the paddock to the property line. So the variances that we're seeking really are to put it against the Forest Ave layout, but there's no house within 75 feet, which is the nearest house across the street, and the only house that's located within the 100-foot setback other than the applicant's property, which they're proposing to relocate an existing dwelling that, remember, this is two addresses right now, it's 306 and 312, so what they're planning to do is to remove the property at 306, the dwelling, and essentially rebuild that as a guest house garage on their own property. And that's the closest dwelling that will be sited to the paddock. So that's the variance that we're seeking. That's the nearest. It's to themselves. Can we move this elsewhere on the property and meet the setbacks? No, because we'll never get away from the fact that there are dwellings on our property that will be within 100 feet of the paddock, no matter where the shape goes. And if we try to move it to the rear of the property, and now we're going to be likely exceeding, due to the minimum shape that this needs to be, all of the sideline setbacks to the property. Now, I just want to speak very quickly on the zoning issue, because I appreciate Attorney Schultz's interpretation or perhaps manipulation of the bylaw as it's read, but I'll read it specifically. And as we said, it is allowed. It's an allowed use in the residential district, but it's subject to the Board of Health's regulations and provided that no noise or odor is observable at the lot lines. Correct. But the Board of Health regulations are what set the setbacks. And so we're meeting that setback to their aggrieved abutter by almost double as it relates to the paddock to the property line, and we meet or exceed it with respect to the distance from the paddock to the dwelling. So we're 100 feet from the dwelling, and we're almost 60 feet from their property line, which incidentally the property line has grown in our direction with occupation that actually is on our property. So.
Question, the proposed paddock measures 83 by 138 feet, or 11,454 square feet.
Correct.
Based upon the information that was provided, it seems to me that an adequate paddock for 2 horses, considering their health, would be between 7,200 square feet and 16,000 square feet. That's using the dimensions 80 by 200 or 60 by 120. The question I have is, can we reduce the size of the paddock to mitigate some of the setback conditions?
So certainly it can get reduced. Are you talking about reducing it in the direction of Forest Ave to increase that setback?
Well, I'll let you make that decision, but can we reduce the size of the paddock area? So,
It's conceivable that it can be reduced, yes.
and that would result in setbacks or variances that are less than as laid out in your plan at this point?
Yes, because any movement that we make into the property from Forest Ave will reduce that variance to the setback, both the right-of-way and the property line. We'll still have, and also it will reduce obviously the setback to the dwelling across the street at 299 Forest, who's in support of the project.
Could I have a minute or two just to respond to some of this?
I'm sorry, Attorney Schultz, I did not hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was asking if it was okay if I had a minute or two just to respond to some of this, to clarify. I'll try and speak up also. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I will be quick. I wanted to make sure, well, I'm sure the board knows, that others know, including John, that the Board of Health regulation standards for any variance, so that would even be 1 inch, let alone what they're seeking, is that the applicant has to prove that it would be a manifest injustice not to receive the variance, and that it is in the public health interest to do so, or alternatively not contrary to the interest of public health. So sort of regardless of making it a little better, if given that John noted that that is conceivable, I also query whether the standard for receiving this variance is achievable. Certainly, they have made no attempt to prove that they deserve these variances, but also I think most significantly, the Board of Health has powers beyond granting these variances and then approving the project or not granting variances. As I'm sure you're all aware, we're looking to you to protect the public health. And finally, John and I can respectfully agree to disagree, but given my conversation with Director Hallen and my profession, zoning regulations are different from Board of Health regulations. The zoning regulations that have the condition of no odor and no noise at the property line is a zoning regulation that has to be satisfied to the building inspector, and if challenged by us, which it would be if a building permit were granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals, and if granted by them and challenged by us to the Superior Court. And so I don't want there to be any misunderstanding that those zoning regulations can be ignored. I understand it's not under the purview of the Board of Health. Nevertheless, in this unique scenario where those regulations are odor and noise, which are also factors and considerations that you take into account, I did think it was significant to point them out. Thank you.
So you're suggesting that the applicant must meet a twofold
Yes, I am.
activity, one with the Board of Health and one with the zoning board?
Yes,
or
I
zoning
am.
regulations?
That's for any construction, they would of course have to, yes.
Can we just clarify, again, we're sort of getting into the sidebar. Is the board asking questions? Does the board seem to think that we need a zoning special permit or variance for this application? Is that what Jennifer is trying to encourage you to believe?
That's not what I am saying, John.
Then what is the question?
I didn't ask the question.
From my perspective, it's a matter of, I'm thinking about this look, whatever we decide, it's going to go to the zoning board, right? So I'm just thinking about it.
Go to the building.
That's not true. And that's where I just want to avoid the confusion. If the neighbor chooses to file basically an appeal to the zoning board of a building permit, then we would go to the zoning board. But we don't trigger anything.
Though the building inspector cannot rightly issue a building permit if the request to keep farm animals, that use, is non-compliant. The building inspector is the zoning enforcement officer for the town. So while of course you're right that if he issued it and we believed it to be wrong and not zoning compliant, we would bring that appeal and then this would appear before the zoning board of appeal. But we cannot skip the step that it is left to the discretion of the zoning officer, who is the building inspector, to make the determination of whether the request to build the stable, the paddock, all structures on the property is zoning compliant. And that means no odor and no sign at the property line. If the building inspector cannot find, and we'll see, that it satisfies that, then he will not issue the building permit. He cannot.
Okay, I don't think we're in a position to, one second, Dave. I don't think we're in a position to speak to the zoning, for the building inspector.
Of course.
I mean, I can't make any decision for him. That's a separate issue. And if you want to proceed in that direction, if your client wants to proceed in that direction, fine. But I think we're here to look at the Board of Health application.
Yes.
Dave Dugan, please.
Thank you, sir. I'll be brief and I'll try to use simple language. We live at 100 Black Rock Road, directly behind the Blisses, and on the map, we share a lot of shared property line. We're totally in support of this project, and I'd like to mention a few points. One, regarding communications, I don't think the Blisses could have done anything better about being prompt and detailed with what they shared. We got a certified letter, notice to abutters on February 4th. I have it right here. I got a super detailed email from the Blisses with PDF of the site plan. All the questions we had were answered. So it's very clear. Point two, people have been making comments about the neighborhood and suitability. I live here for 20 years. My property has a horse barn. There were horses here until at least 1975. That is for certain. And there are other properties nearby that had livestock. So that's the second point. Regarding the site placement, we are totally fine with it. I actually think it's ideal. It sits in a very low setting with a very high stone outcropping that sort of surrounds two sides of it. And from our property, I couldn't ask for a siting of this. And the final point is, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm curious. I've invested a lot in my property. I read the regulations. I have a copy, which I thought would be the topic of this discussion. Town of Cohasset rules and regulations governing horses, stables, cloven hoof livestock, fowl, and poultry. I read the whole thing. It's a long document. It's very clear. I feel like the Blisses have checked every single box that I could have thought of on that plan. So I guess my question is, isn't the function of this meeting to review it against that set of regulations? Isn't that the purpose of this discussion? But regardless, I totally support this plan.
I think this meeting is to decide whether the applicant has whether the application meets the Board of Health regulations for boarding livestock. Given that, there are some other issues that surround it, but we're not in a position to speak to those issues. We're here solely to look at the application, and our board members may have some questions, some suggestions, but in the end, we will have to either approve or disapprove, or actually continue the meeting to another date if we're not satisfied. Michael.
In my view, that to Mr. Dugan's point, I was, I've also read and I think that the process is straightforward with respect to the permitting. Like, I'm not so concerned about permitting from the Board of Health standpoint. I'm a little bit worried about the variances. That's the part that I get hung up on, which is that the variances that are described in the ordinance clearly lays out the setbacks, and the setbacks exist for a reason. And so my whole angle of questioning is mainly focused on what has been done in order to avoid those setbacks, right? So being fewer than 30 feet from a public way, these exist for a reason, right? 30 feet from a property line, which is hit 100 feet from the dwelling, right? So I want to be clear that I'm all for people being able to use their property to the point that they're allowed to, and I appreciate the commentary. I'm actually just really hung up on the variance question. And these variances suggest that it's not, I mean, they don't suggest, they list the situation where your total acreage, right? There's a limit in terms of how many animals you can have in a certain space. And then within that, there are some limits about, okay, well, how close to the property line and how close to the public way. And because those are in the Board of Health rules and regulations governing horses, stables, cloven, hooded livestock, fowl, and poultry, that's the part that I'm really hung up on and wondering about, is what considerations have been given for options to be within those variances, because they exist for reasons. That's my point.
I agree with you, Michael. Therein lies the reason for my questioning about reducing the size of the paddock that's consistent with good health of the horses, and also mitigating some or all of the variance requests.
So, I just want to mention, actually, I'm sorry, there was one point I wanted to make, John, I'm sorry. The one other thing was the mitigation plan about the manure management and the vector management are clear. It all makes sense. It's like all these things are handled, right? It's just a matter of the variances. So I just wanted to add that part. Sorry, John, go ahead.
That's okay. So I think what we're hearing is that if we can, what we can do physically, because we looked at every different scenario on this property to site this. Naturally, the box can get reconfigured to minimize the relief requested across the street. It's essentially across the street and to ourselves. We can't eliminate the 100-foot setback to ourselves. So is the board amenable to keeping the minimum of 100 feet relief request on the table for ourselves? We're not going to, we can work to mitigate the impact across the street, but we're most likely still going to have less than 100 feet from ourselves.
I would.
Well, that gets to my
for a reason.
That gets to my point, which is that the lot is of the wrong shape and size for a stable of this, for two horses. That you just hit the crux of it, right? So that 100-foot setback to the residents is a public health question. So, and if you're unable to accommodate that, then that suggests that the lot is not of the right shape and size to accommodate two horses.
Well, the principal dwelling, we're talking about the guest house, so it's still
It's a garage, sort of.
Yeah.
It's a garage. I mean, I don't know if I can speak to some of what's been said. There's been a lot said and a lot to unpack. I think that predominantly what we've laid out, and I appreciate everyone's commentary. I personally think horses make a landscape more beautiful. I appreciate also that everyone has a perspective, and I am respectful of that. So I think one thing that, and specific to the variances, what we've done was we've set the paddock itself as an opportunity also for us to ride the horse within the property. We can ride the horse within the paddock itself, and it creates an opportunity for us to just use the horse more often versus having to go off-site on Whitney Woods, which of course there's lots of equine friendly and open space both in Cohasset as well as the trails, the rail trails, etc., for us to ride the horse. So the goal here was to create more space for us to actually leverage that paddock beyond just the space for the horse. And so that was really sort of driving some of the setback. Additionally, I think while we're talking about a stable application, I think it's also important to contextualize that there's many animals listed in this stable application, and the application broadly sets the standard, which is very conservative for horses, and perhaps not so conservative if you were to be applying for, say, swine, to keep a pig on a property. I think it's also important for us to make it super clear. We're not after a farm. This is, our horse we consider to be an athlete, which we maintain the highest standards of care and keeping for. This is on our property as well. And frankly, we plan to have a pool on the property. And we of course would never want anyone to be impacted by the horse on the property. So all of the things that are being raised we are the predominant, first person to be addressing these issues. And so I think those are the couple of things. I think additionally, if I were to sort of take a step back and look at the town of Cohasset over the past several years, investing in many committees and initiatives to address very important topics such as overbuilding and maintaining diversity of landscape and preservation of land. Here we are acquiring two additional lots, pulling them back together to their original state, and frankly, bringing them back to, our house was built in 1890, and really trying to enhance both the property and the neighborhood with some diversity as well as some beautification. We love this area, as I'm sure everyone on this call does, and it's very important to us to create a beautiful space, and one that I think, frankly, people would enjoy seeing a horse on Forest Ave. So those are my 2 cents.
Now, John, you noted that the setback issue in relation to the proposed guest house, and that's the one that's
garage. It's an accessory structure.
The garage and guest house, proposed 3-car garage and guest house. Any possibility of moving that structure, since it's not been built, a little further back toward, I don't see the name of further back, so that we maybe don't need that much of a setback relief toward the Butler's property, which is back, straight back. Well, what's the position on that? Is that possible?
You can see the 100-foot setback from where the paddock is now. Again, we're trying to maintain this natural ledge outcropping to the south and to the west. So what we could conceivably do is bring the paddock in from Forest Ave to probably even eliminate the requests across the street. We can keep it 100 feet from the principal dwelling, but we're going to be inside. Obviously, there's only so much without shifting it, the structure substantially. So it would still fall that accessory structure, which is not the main dwelling. Its dwelling is the setback. It's to dwelling on your regulation. It's not to barn. It's not to accessory building. It's not to garage. It's to dwelling. So we're being conservative in this application to show ourselves as the closest, but we're 75 feet to the 299 Forest across the street, so we can likely eliminate that variance, as well as the setback. We would narrow and reconfigure the paddock to maximize what we can on our side, and we'll be within 100 feet of the garage.
And so as it stands now, the proposed setback is 12.5 feet, is that correct? To the house, to the proposed structure?
Yes, to the proposed structure.
And 100 feet is the ideal
For a dwelling.
for a dwelling? Well, this will be a dwelling, I take it.
It's a
It's a
garage.
garage,
If
actually.
it has habitable space, it's a dwelling under the
It
zoning code.
says guest house, that tells me dwelling. I'm not sure I understand that. If it's not going to be inhabited, then it's not an issue.
No, it's intended to be a garage with space for us facing on the backside, facing the pool.
Then there can't be any bedroom or bathroom in there or kitchen facilities for any guest to stay.
And so will it just be a garage, or will it be a garage plus living quarters?
Well, there won't be anyone living there. It's intended to be a multi-use space, right? It's a 3-car garage, and on the backside, it has what the equivalent of a pool house that will face the pool.
Correct me if I'm wrong, John. The placement of a bathroom or a toilet would preclude that. Is that correct?
It would certainly make it habitable. So the question is it a full-time dwelling? Is that the intent of the setback, the 100 feet?
Doesn't say full-time anywhere in the regulations. I think that's an inappropriate manipulation of that language.
I'm asking the chairman of the Board of Health a question.
Yeah. Michael, what's your take on this?
Well, I mean, from my standpoint, my standpoint is unchanged, which is that I'm not yet convinced that this has been optimized to the point where it's within the variances. I feel like I'm fine with that's it. I'm just gonna leave it. I'm just gonna leave it there. It seems to me that there needs to be more optimization on the property before I feel like we've been actually. I feel like variances should be taken after a certain amount of optimization. Like, this is the best that we can do, and I don't think we're quite at that point yet. And again, I'm looking at this from the perspective of the variant. The setbacks exist for a reason, and so the closer that we can hew to them without just sort of glossing over them, the better. And I think that we need. I would love to see that reconsidered.
So the setbacks exist for things like noise and from neighbors and abutters, but if we could improve those setbacks, as John described earlier, and we only had a setback variance to our dwelling, we don't care if we're too close to the horse barn. So is that acceptable? Would that be acceptable enough for you, is what I'm asking?
To me, yes, it would. But it would, again, so Robin, the chairman, and John have been going back and forth about, well, if you move this there and you did this and the other thing, it's sort of like, yeah, well, maybe that would work and that would be better and we could fix that setback. That's the experiment that I'm looking to understand, is to know that the plan, that we're not just approving the variances just to cram as much stuff as possible into a given lot size and shape, is basically what I'm getting at. So I would yes. And so to answer your question, Mr. Bliss, yes, that setback is of less. That causes me a bit less of a that setback from the garage is less of a concern to me than say from the street.
Well, I think what we can do is certainly make a modification to reduce substantially, perhaps eliminate the setback request to the dwelling across the street, and to potentially eliminate the setback request to Forest Ave with a modification to the paddock. But we'll still have obviously less than 100 feet to our own garage / pool house / space.
If that proposed structure is just the garage and not, quote, a dwelling, unquote, would that make a difference in the setback requirement?
Dwelling is what's the setback in your requirement. There's no setback to accessory structures.
So a dwelling is something that must be lived in, is that correct?
A dwelling includes structures that have human habitation.
Okay. So if this structure is just to be only a 3-car garage, that would eliminate that issue, is that correct?
It would not be a dwelling.
That's correct.
Right. But I think what Michael said is that he would have less of an issue with our own structure, habitable or not, is I think what I heard.
That is correct. That's how I interpret it.
I would like to move that we continue this discussion to the next meeting. I think at this point, we're going circling each other. And so if we can move this to the next meeting, that would be acceptable. Do I have a second to that?
I will second that motion.
Excuse me, what is your next meeting?
Well, we haven't said it yet.
I second that.
Okay, let's, all in favor? Signify by saying aye. Motion carries 3-0. Our next meeting has not been set yet and will be set later in the meeting. But it will be approximately 4 weeks from now, approximately.
Robin, you should actually do it right now, because when you just make that motion to move it, you need to actually say the date when it's going to be. So
You go to a date certain. Right?
yeah.
So
like maybe Wednesday, April 4th or something.
April 7th is the first Wednesday.
Okay.
What are we looking at?
Wednesday, April 7th?
That's 1, 2, 3. That's 5 weeks. I would even go for the 31st of March.
Yep.
Or even earlier. Like I don't want to drag but the goal is not to drag this out. That's not the goal. I think that I would love to study this a bit more and give the Bliss family and Mr. Cavanero to think about an opportunity to sort of think about this and then come back. So I want to be clear that, at least from my perspective, this is not a matter of kicking the can. There's some study that needs to be done and some thinking needs to be done. So I would say I would be amenable to a meeting even the 31st or the 24th. I'm just looking at
clear on that note. So we will be changing the setback line as we discussed. So we will not be needing a variance from the front of the property at all. It will only be the variance for our property. And we're not going to remove the entire pool house, guest house from that function of that building. So we're not looking to do that. So, I mean, why can't we just make a decision now on that I know we can't make a decision without seeing the engineering plan, but that's to me, like, those are the next steps we're going to take. Are those going to be acceptable? And to get this approved.
Can I just say one thing the board needs to keep in mind also is something the attorney said earlier, which is true, is that if you do not approve the variances, it's up to the Blisses to prove that it's manifest injustice. In other words, they have to be the ones to prove that this is really unfair, right? And so the burden is really on them. So when they request these variances, there has to be a reason why. If you don't approve it, it's going to be very unfair to them, manifest injustice. So just to kind of keep that in mind as well.
Thanks, Pam. I would argue that by not denying it right now, we're actually going to continue it and ask them to come back.
Right.
I think that probably is that. To your point, I think that actually avoids that whole angle. I'm not an attorney. I'm a chemist, but
Let me suggest March 31, 6:30, March 31. Will that work? Lynn,
Yes, that works for me.
you're okay? Okay. So we'll continue this until March 31, 6:30, March 31.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
thank you. Do we have any like septic tanks to approve or anything like that?
No. No. Well, you know what we do have? I'm glad that you just said that, Michael. Because there is something, there were septic plans that were approved 3 years ago and they only last 3 years. They expire after 3 years. So Carmen Hudson, who works for John Cavanaugh, actually submitted a letter to request that they get extended for 1 year. And I got to just dig that out. So you talk amongst yourselves.
Do we need to take that tonight?
You know what? It's easy. I mean, there's no reason not to just extend it 1 more year. It's like a part of Title V. It's I don't even know if you have to even necessarily do it. I mean, I could have probably done it, but I just figured let's just make it official. You could vote to extend it for 1 year.
You tell us what the motion is, and I'm on it.
Okay.
And did you say something about the water permit that we don't need to take that?
We're not going to do that. Luckily, the person that had an issue with it, I kept telling him that's not a Board of Health issue. Like the well meets all the Board of Health setbacks and stuff. And he just was like, I know, but this is my platform. I want to say why I just disagree with this. And I kept telling him it's a Conservation Commission issue. It's not a Board of Health. And he finally understood that at the end of the day. And so he submitted a letter that he would like me to read. Let me just do that first. Just so you can hear him out, basically. And this can go into our minutes. It's relatively short. Dear Pam, as we discussed, I would like to withdraw from the agenda of the Board of Health meeting this evening. It's not the approval of a private well on 10 Ocean Ledge Drive that is at issue. I will be approaching the Planning Zoning Board about the overriding issue, which is safety. Specifically, safety as it pertains to adding another driveway and house, which will include extensive blasting to an existing subdivision that includes 11 houses, 43 bedrooms, and 26 garage bays that are currently serviced by a 13.5-foot wide driveway. I quote from the common driveway minimum standards. At such a point as the common driveway is to serve more than 9 houses, it shall conform to the rules and regulations governing the subdivision of land in Cohasset, which states that the roadway must be a minimum of 50 feet for the safety of the residents. Unfortunately, our little corner of Cohasset has been overlooked because of all the squeaky wheels that have moved away. I'm the last one of the old guard, and my new neighbors have been asked me to speak. I will be preparing an affidavit signed by all the abutters attesting to their concerns for traffic and safety issues. None of the 3 5,600 square foot houses that have been built by 792 Jerusalem Realty Trust have sold, primarily because of the same concerns. Thank you so much for your time and good luck with the horses tonight. Signed, Hollis Honeyman. So we'll just put that into the record.
That's great. I'm so glad that was a Board of Health item.
I'd just like to point out, I get the mail for all those people at 792 Jerusalem because we're 729.
I thought you were right by there.
Yeah, and I keep returning it like to sender and it keeps coming back. So I don't even know if they exist. It's kind of neat to hear it in a context outside my mailbox. But.
All right, let's keep going. We're going on long. This is long.
Maybe Mary would like to speak. Break things
Well,
up
we
a
have
little.
we have this agenda, right? So do we need to talk about the warrant article?
Oh yeah, that's that.
You're muted, Robin. Robin, you're muted, Robin. Robin, Robin, you're muted.
Robin, you
Still
muted.
Still muted.
I'm sorry.
There you go. There you go.
Okay. The warrant article is to change the name of the Cohasset Board of Health to the Cohasset Board of Public Health. And it reads, to see if the town will vote to change the name of the Cohasset Board of Health to the Cohasset Board of Public Health, reflecting its mission to keep the community safe and healthy by providing programs consistent with the core principles of public health. Do you want me to read the informational summary that will go along? I think you all know what that is.
Yeah. What happened last year that this didn't come up on the town warrant?
COVID.
Chris Senior something. It was something to do with Chris Senior. He didn't do something, and so it got bumped.
It was because of COVID, and they really wanted to scale way back at the town meeting.
Yeah.
Right. It was a drive-in town meeting,
Right.
and they wanted to limit the agenda as much as possible.
And I was disappointed because
But it was already, but it was on the warrant. This is what I don't understand. Like, we didn't vote on it for a reason. There was a reason for it. It wasn't just that he wanted to move past it, right? You can't just do that.
It was on the warrant, but it was removed at the town meeting.
Okay.
And I was disappointed. I was all set my Sunday best to defend it, but so be it. We'll try it again.
Robin, I would love to move to place this warrant article on the town meeting agenda for April, as you have proposed. I move that.
Lynn?
I second it.
All in favor? Motion carries 3-0. Thank you all. Okay, next. Approve the meeting minutes for February 3rd, 2021. I move that we approve the meeting minutes from February 3rd, 2021. Second? Second by
I will second
Michael.
that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0. We have set the next meeting date for the 31st of March. And next we will hear from Pam.
Okay. Can we just do one more thing?
Yes.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Well, there it is.
Yep.
Can you just vote to extend the septic approval plans for 126 and 128 Forest Avenue for 1 year?
I move to extend the septic approval for 126 and 128 Forest Avenue for 1 year.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0.
Thank you.
Okay.
I hope they paid their fee. Did they pay their fee?
They did. A check for a whopping
good.
$30 was made to the town of Cohasset.
Okay, so Pam.
I think we are underestimating the cost of our operations. That's all I'm going to say there. I'm sorry.
You wouldn't believe how hard poor Amy just had to work to get a $30 check for a dumpster. I mean, it was probably cost like $400 for her time to get that $30 check.
Penny wise, pound foolish, as they say.
Yeah. Anyway, so Mary and I have just been working primarily on vaccination clinics, which, Mary, why don't you go ahead?
All right. So first I want to start with some good news for everybody. we're going from the red zone to the yellow zone this week.
Yay!
Yeah, so we've had a total of 21 cases for the past 2 weeks, so that takes us into the yellow zone. So that's good news. So clinics, Pam and I are working on clinics. Tomorrow we have a second dose clinic at Wilcott Commons. We're gonna do 80 people, I think, and the paramedics are gonna do 21 at 60 Elm, over 75 home visits. So I don't know if you've seen in the news, but the state, it's a bit of a disaster in terms of trying to get second doses. I kind of was a little aggressive on Friday with the state and sent them an email and said, I haven't received notification that we're going to get our second doses. And it was, 11 o'clock Friday night, back and forth. And so finally late Saturday, they said that we would get 100 doses, which is a good thing. But towns like Hingham and Norwell and Taunton, they are not getting second doses. So Susan Sarney right now in Hingham is canceling 175 people for tomorrow. So, so just kind of an FYI, I feel like we lucked out this week. I'm not so sure we're going to be as lucky next week, I think. So
my mom is on the list for next week.
Isn't she on the list for tomorrow?
You know what? I'm glad I think next week.
All right, check
I
that.
love small towns. I'm pretty sure your mom's on the list for tomorrow.
Is your last name Doxy?
Yeah.
I don't think it's this week.
I don't, but I have to say she was so impressed. She was so happy with, like, she had to go by herself. I was a little nervous. But like she was saying how wonderful everything was and smooth it went.
So that's the frustration, that we have this down, and our plan was vaccinate 600 people a week. We can do this. We're in it for the long haul. And then they put the brakes on us. So, but it's not the state. I mean, it's the federal level. We just don't have the supply. So I do think as supply picks up, which it will be a couple of months away, they will come back to us and say, all right, you still want to be in the business. So we'll just have to see how it goes. But so other than, those are the two big things, I think. So yeah, we're chipping away. We were approved to get vaccine to do our public housing. So we have about 40 people left to do over there. We're planning on March 17th to do that. So happy St. Patrick's Day. Here's your vaccination and a shot and a beer. So anyway, that's basically what I have. Other than my reports, you've seen my reports, and
so we're assured we do have the vaccine for second doses this week or tomorrow.
Yes.
But next week or the week after, not so?
So the plan right now is we have second doses next week. We have an off week, and then the last week of March, the 25th. Okay. So right now there are no guarantees for second doses.
So Mary, what do you tell people then? Like, so what is Susan Sarney telling her people when she calls to cancel? How can they get a second dose?
Well, so it's actually postponed.
I think what's going to happen is if the state, I think if you didn't get it this week, you'll get it next week.
Right. Okay. It's postponed, not really canceled. Yeah. That's what Norwell was telling people. Right. Your mom, Sandra. Yes. Sandra Doxy. She's the 11th, so she's the next week, and so there's a good chance we might have to end up calling everybody and telling them it's postponed to the next week or something.
Okay.
Would that create a problem because there's a window during which you have to get the second dose after the first?
Well, the windows, they say you can go as far as 6 weeks, so I think we'll be okay if we're only pushed out a week or two.
Yeah. That's what DPH explained to us, that, when they allocate the vaccine when it comes in, right, they have a whole hierarchy, and it starts off with the mass vaccination sites like Gillette. And when it goes all the way down to the bottom, that's us, local health. And so when they run out, they have to take it away from us. And so, they explained that it won't hurt to postpone it for a week or two. And then unfortunately, I think it's like Russian roulette, who doesn't get it on a certain week.
But
And
not
thanks to
longer.
Mary, we got it this week, but we might not be so lucky next week.
I mean, if it goes beyond 6 weeks, that might be ineffective. I'm sure the state's aware of that.
Well, hopefully that doesn't happen. That would be a disaster.
Yes, it would. So I was looking at the MIIS and just, I don't remember the exact numbers, but the boards of health have delivered more vaccine than the mass vaccination sites to date.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
Very interesting.
Yeah. You know, and as we've said, I've been in this job for 13 years. I used to sit with Joe Godzik and we would review our emergency dispensing site plans. That was required by the state. It was required by the federal government. We had to submit them to the state. We'd get grant money. Oh my God, we were working on those all the time. And here we are with our emergency dispensing site set up and ready to roll. And it's like, oh no, forget about that. So it's crazy. Anyway, that's where we're at.
Okay, Pam.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've just been working on too, is getting people registered and organizing and then trying to do my other job at the same time. So it's just been kind of a handful. Again, you see the weekly reports. It's like kind of split it into COVID related versus non-COVID related, and sometimes it's much more COVID than anything else. And I don't know.
The other thing that we're sort of being that we're facing now are all these spring and summer programs. They're all coming forward to say, what can we do this? What can we do? Can we, so we're just waiting again on some clear guidance from the state in terms of what, day camp can do, what Holly Hill Farm can do, what the sports complex can do. So we're just waiting on that.
Are they trying to implement rec camp again? Like,
yeah,
are they trying to do what they did last? Because they ended up doing something last year, right?
I don't think
not much.
No,
not at the end. They did some small.
Yeah, he's going to try to do. He was talking about the other day, sort of half the capacity, and see if they couldn't come up with something.
So, Robin, do you still have the board directors meeting every week, or is that meeting stopped? You were having like the chairs. There was like the chairs of the Board of Health and the selectmen and everyone like this. Is that not happening anymore? I've missed your meeting notes.
I've been forgotten. I don't know.
They haven't been having them. They kind of ran out, and then they just didn't send out a new updated meeting.
Yeah, so there haven't been any.
We've cut back on our meetings that we've had for the emergency management group. I mean, we used to do 7 days a week, and then it was just down to a couple now because we're having clinics on Thursdays. We were doing Monday and Thursday for a really long time. We're just doing Mondays for the most part now.
Okay, thank you both. My report. First, of course, I'd like to thank both of you for the extraordinary effort you're putting in and what you do, and certainly your hours are beyond what you signed up for. I know that. But one of the things that I've been thinking about is if somebody calls me, let's say Chris Senior calls me, or maybe somebody from the newspaper calls me and asks me, how many septic reviews have you done last year?
It is in the annual report. It's funny you say that. Amy and I were just filling it out for 2020.
Well, let me finish. The point is, I don't have that information. I don't think Michael or Lynn has the information. And I've been remiss in not suggesting that we have some tabular documents. Now, all the reports are all great source material and all the information is there, but it's just background information. And in order to pull the numbers out, it would take I mean, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. The same with, for instance, our COVID, the vaccine clinics. Somebody asked me today, how many Cohasset people over 75 plus have you vaccinated in the last 3 weeks? I couldn't tell you. I don't have someplace as a spreadsheet. Or how many others than Cohasset people have you vaccinated? I know you have that information, but I don't have it, and I know Michael and Lynn don't have it. And I think it's important that we all share this information. I'd be willing.
I would argue.
Yeah.
I would argue that the answer to that question is to give them Pam's phone number, or because I mean it is in the report, right? It's in the weekly report too, right? The number of vaccinations that went out. So
it's not easily accessible for me. I mean, I'll have to go through reports to get a number. I was remiss in not suggesting this probably a long time ago. I'd be willing to set up some spreadsheets, suggested spreadsheets, share them around, and do what you will with it. And maybe we can get on to some kind of spreadsheets where we can all have the number and look at the same number rather than having to read through the reports. The reports are great, but they're part of it. They're just reports, okay? And they don't give us.
Can I suggest?
Yes.
Can I suggest that a solution to that is once we know what the total number is, then each week, all that Mary or Pam would need to do their report was to give them that last, the latest total.
Well, however we do it, we need numbers. I'm going to set up a couple of spreadsheets, send it around. If you think it's superfluous, fine. But I'd like to know how many first doses, how many second doses. And the thing that I'd really like to know, and I can't get it out of MIIS, is how many people in Cohasset by age group have received a first dose?
Would you be able to find that information? Would you be able to find that information outside of who got vaccinated here?
It's MIIS has it. The Massachusetts Immunization Information System has it, but they've only reported it by county, which doesn't do us any good. I mean, we're in Cohasset, we're not in Dedham, and that percent is different. So Pam or Mary, do either of you know how to tease that information out so we can at least, somebody says, well, how's Cohasset doing? What's your overall response rate in terms of first doses, second doses by age group? That would be enormously important to report. So
I hear what you're saying, Robin. I'm just cautious about the cost benefit analysis of what you're saying, right? So if it's a matter of generating another report or another spreadsheet, I mean, so that we know beyond what we already get in our weekly reports, I'm not sure what the problem is that you're wanting to solve right now. If people are reaching out to you, if the general public is reaching out to you with questions, I would then refer them to Pam, or if we somehow make it easy that the weekly reports now include the sum total of these categories, if that data is even available. Like I'm just really resistant to sending Mary or Pam on an additional sort of data collection thing when they have when they're up to their eyeballs and just getting needles in arms. What are we looking to accomplish with this bit of information? And is it worth the extra sort of burden that we'd be creating? That's my only question. I'm just leery of piling more.
Yeah. Well, what I think I'm interested in accomplishing is, if queried about what are you doing over there at the Board of Health, I just say, well, I have all these reports, but I can't give you any definitive data. Call me back next week. I'd like to be able to, go to a spreadsheet and say, yeah, as of such and such a date, we did this, X, Y, Z. And that answers the question. Chris Sr. has never asked that question, has he? I don't know why he hasn't asked that question. That would be a question I'd want to know.
But we have meetings with him every week, so he knows that these clinics are going on, and he knows that we're only getting 100 doses a week. So.
I mean, I think there's some value to having what you're already giving us and like in a spreadsheet if it's not any more effort. I mean, I'm thinking I could just do it as well. I mean, you're giving the information. One of us could just create it and do it based off your weekly reports.
No, that's all.
I don't see the value in needing to know the number of people vaccinated in Cohasset unless it was readily available.
Right, which it's not. I mean, if the MIIS only wants to report it by county, it is what it is.
Stinks that we're in a county and we're surrounded by a different county, but there's nothing. I mean, so a better viewpoint would, I feel safer knowing that Plymouth County has higher vaccination rates than.
Well,
I mean,
you know, if you recall back so many months ago when DPH was only reporting cases by county. Do you remember that? That wasn't so long ago.
Yep.
Lo and behold, they report it by city and town now. So they saw the wisdom of that. I mean, again, county is meaningless, especially Plymouth County. Goodness, that's huge. Anyway, let's see what we can do. So we all have a handle on, if somebody asks us a question, we all have the same answer. I hate to fumble around and my training makes it impossible for me to fumble.
Right. Well, I mean, you could tell people that we've been getting 100 a week and that's coming to an end. Now we're only doing 100 doses of second doses a week. And I mean, if anybody wants numbers, I'd be happy to give them to you. Like Michael said, just tell them to call me. But I don't know.
Go to the source, man.
Let me think about that. All right. Anything else? Okay, let's adjourn the meeting.
Lynn, would you like to make a motion?
I was waiting for you and you were sitting there asleep at the switch.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I was listening intently to the first agenda item.
Not you, I was talking about Michael.
Yeah.
Right.
Not you.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I